Here. So while we work through those technical difficulties and you all have a moment to eat, catch up on some snacking here, what I'll ask that you do at your different tables is for the icebreaker exercise, just to get you all talking, not with your mouths full, but just talking amongst yourselves. Reflect a little bit, if I could ask you to reflect a little bit on the previous session, the first session. So just to refresh your memories, what I'd like to happen for the next 5 minutes or so is just each individual table have a group conversation about your one sort of aha moment from session number one, the one takeaway that you have been finding yourselves bringing up in conversations with friends and neighbors. I'd love to hear back from each group. If you can just pick one gem to share with the larger group. We'll have these technical difficulties worked out and we'll get started in about 5 to 10 minutes. Thanks.
Sure.
I have to say that you know somebody's sitting there? It doesn't make sense. Somebody's sitting here? Nobody's over there. If you do that, I won't be able to wear my glasses. Oh. You can turn that way. Oh, yeah. I should turn around and face it, but it's right here. Yeah, I want it's like everything is certainly this afternoon. You know, it's like, so what areas are areas of investment and areas of stability? I think that's
for me, just thinking about planning out where we can add density. I mean, to me, it just seems like there needs to be more research behind this before just sitting down and brainstorming. We need more data to go by. We can't just kind of haphazardly say, oh, not in our neighborhood, let's put it over in that neighborhood.
Well, I think what's up for us are the areas of reinvestment and the areas of stability, and they're not really. It's amazing to see. And then there's a lot of American apartheid. Yeah, okay. Very, very. It's so hard to do. And what's interesting is that the lines have been moving. But I saw on top of some But the first one was how integral it is to think about action. Regulations.
From all of the different things that have come up in your conversation so far, we're going to pass the microphone and we're going to ask each table to share one sort of nugget that you took away from session number one that we had 2 weeks ago on citywide planning. And I'm actually going to do this democratically. Who would like to go first? Which table would love to share with the group? Right, so it's this table over here, the chatty table. So much for democracy. I have a microphone. Who's going to grab it? Bob.
100,000 people in 10 years.
That's the nugget. That's the challenge that we face, or the opportunity, depending on the way you look at it. And just because this table is close, says that. Table number 2, who's going to grab the mic?
Maggie. I'm going to reframe the way our conversation started because we got off topic. But it was a revelation to hear people from so many different neighborhoods, so we just started talking about our neighborhoods.
Great. Also, one of the great things about Denver is all of the diverse neighborhoods that we have. Each one of them has a special little something, its own little character, its own flair. All right, table number 3, who's going to represent for this group?
It's like you. You should have your hands up, so that's you. I was going. Is this on? It is. You just gotta really want to talk. We talked about map drawing exercise and how everything was defined in Blueprint Denver and then everything was rezoned in 2010. So it seems to me that the sensitivity and the refinement needs to be defining the areas of reinvestment within the areas of stability. Interesting. Great.
Those were some pretty deep thoughts. Great, thank you so much for indulging me. It's always helpful for us to hear sort of what you heard, what you took away from the conversation. We have a real treat this evening. If you enjoyed the first session, I can guarantee the second session is going to sort of build off of all of that interesting information that we were covering in our first session. So this evening our topic is going to be on citywide, neighborhood planning, small area planning. Let me share with you. Oh, by the way, I took a note. I took notes of all the hotspots, folks. I figured we've got some good resources here. So I got all, I haven't been to all of them yet, but I wanted to share those with you. So here, real quick, is our agenda this evening. You can see we're sort of already behind, but that's okay. We'll make up for it. We've got the icebreaker we just did. We've got an hour-long presentation. That's why we gave you food and water. Restrooms, I think, are on this floor right by the elevators. I'm guessing. Confirm that. If you need restrooms. I've set it to automatically. That's fine. Here we go. Do we have extra handouts? Yep, we've got a couple extra handouts. If you haven't yet received one, raise your hand. Steve will walk over and present it to you. So we've got an hour-long presentation, and then we'll give you all a break. We're going to do Q&A. Oh, I apologize, but I want to introduce before we get started. We do have another VIP. I'm so excited. Last session we had the president of INC, Larry Ambrose. This evening we have the co-chair of the Zoning and Planning Committee for INC. So Marty Valdez is a very capable counterpart. This is Greg Kerwin. I'm sorry, Greg Kerwin, and he has another event this evening. So we're excited that he had a chance to just stop by and wave to you all and see sort of the excitement and learning. So thanks for coming out this evening. So we're going to ask that you hold questions, and I know that's going to be hard for this group, but I have pens over there if you need to take notes on your presentation to follow up with after the break. Please do, as we're happy to be on the third floor where we've got this great exhibit of the sort of, I don't know the official title of this exhibit. It's a local Black History museum here for Denver. So some real dignitaries in the African American community here in Denver. So take a moment to wander around. It's beautiful. So Q&A after the break, and then we're going to have you roll up your sleeves again. We've got 2 exercises for you, and we're going to switch up. So one group's going to do one exercise, the other group's going to do the other exercise, and we're going to switch. We'll do a report up, a wrap up, and then an adjournment. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. I think we're going to start off here with Joel Noble. For those of you who haven't yet had the pleasure of meeting Joel, Joel is the president of the Curtis Park Neighbors. He also is a volunteer with our planning board, and he's been a real active participant in the planning board discussions. But he's here this evening representing himself as an individual and someone who's really fully embraced the value of neighborhood planning. So with that, I will pass the microphone to Joel. Again, we'll ask that you hold your questions till the end of the presentation. We're going to cover a lot of ground. So
thank you so much.
You got this, Steve?
Okay, so this evening we're going to talk about small area plans. You've also heard these referred to as neighborhood plans, corridor plans, station area plans. That all means the same thing. Last time we talked about Blueprint Denver, which is one of the citywide plans. The Comp Plan and Blueprint Denver are our citywide plans. In Blueprint Denver, Chapter 8 refers to small area plans. So this is the linkage between the comprehensive plans for the city and these small area plans, neighborhood plans, corridor plans, call them what you will. Now, there were handouts last time. There were copies of Blueprint Denver and Comp Plan sitting on the tables, and I noticed that a lot of people didn't flip through them a lot, but they really are quite readable documents. And in Chapter 8, there's something very powerful in setting up small area plans. First it says, how do we do small area plans? There's a lot of detail about doing them, but it says small area plans must be in agreement with Comp Plan 2000 and Blueprint Denver. That's the key kind of acceptance criteria when they're done. Planning board looks at them, city council looks at them and says, okay, this is very specific, area-specific recommendations, but are they implementing the broader goals of the city that we already have in these other documents? And if they are, then it can go forward and be adopted by city council as a supplement to Blueprint Denver. So technically, all of our small area plans are part of the comprehensive plan. They're adopted as supplements to that. But here's another really powerful part. It says that the city implementation should be readily available. Implementation takes on many levels, and the recommendations in the plans should be implemented. So that means when you do a neighborhood plan, it's going to come up with lots of recommendations. and then it goes to planning board and it gets approved, and it goes to city council and it gets adopted. And those recommendations, it says right here in Blueprint Denver, the city should implement. And that's powerful. Let me tell you a little story about our neighborhood. This is generally the 5-point statistical neighborhood. There's 78 statistical neighborhoods in the city. A lot of neighborhoods refer to themselves as the same thing as their statistical neighborhood. We like to be more complicated here because we're a very old part of the city. So in this broader area, you'll have Curtis Park, the Welton Street corridor, Arapahoe Square, which is really all the parking lots between here and downtown, Enterprise Hills, San Rafael, etc. So in 1987, we took a year off of our regular neighborhood work and only worked with the city on our neighborhood plans. A note about how this works. When you do a neighborhood plan, it takes about a year. It can take longer. And you get everybody in the community involved. Even if not everybody in the community is active in your RNO, it is vital that everybody be involved in this community. If that means bringing in translation, that means bringing in translation. If that means meeting people where they're at, rather than coming to where you're at, that's what needs to be done. Because this is going to be a plan that guides your neighborhood, the city's work in your neighborhood for about a 20-year period. So back in 1987, we worked on this plan. This text is too small for you to read, and as you can see, this was before the invention of color. So I added just a few things here, but I just want to illustrate the power of what one neighborhood plan did. It called for preserving the historic character of Curtis Park. It called for doing more with our park. Our park was kind of abandoned, not well used. It's actually the first park in Denver, and it called for renaming that park to Mestizo Curtis Park. It has some very strong language about the zoning. In the 1950s, the city envisioned this neighborhood over here, this quaint Victorian neighborhood, going away. Downtown was going to grow this way. So from 27th, all the way up to 27th Street, 4 blocks up from here was zoned sort of downtown zoning. And then further up was high-rise apartment zoning. And the language here is very strong. Curtis Park is a residential neighborhood threatened by adverse zoning. And it sets up the land use recommendations later in the plan. And another threat is traffic. Then we go on, city services, trash wasn't being picked up regularly, police weren't coming when you called, it was not a great time in the neighborhood. Unsafe traffic patterns, one of the things that was true with Lawrence Street, just 5 blocks over, was a state highway. And as such, it was really fast. It wasn't necessarily 55 miles an hour posted, but it was certainly wanted to have more pedestrian and bike access. One of the things I'm illustrating to you here is the breadth of recommendations in plans. Police, trash, land use, historic preservation, whatever your neighborhood has as its priorities should be in here. One of my hesitations with the way we set up these 3 sessions is we do comp plan, we do small area planning, and then we do zoning. It can give the impression that the only purpose for small area planning is to set up zoning. That's not true. It's breadth of topics that I'm trying to illustrate tonight. So we had a couple specific recommendations on historic preservation, and this is what we pointed to when we did our 8 landmark districts that cover Curtis Park now. We said, adopted by City Council, part of the comprehensive plan, Curtis Park Neighborhood Plan in 1987 says, essentially do historic preservation, preserve the historic buildings, and have design review on new buildings that come in to make sure they're compatible. And this is the setup of the land use section that basically we pointed to all the way 23 years later in 2010. 2010, the citywide zoning code update came up and we said, we have this neighborhood plan. It says our zoning is wrong. We want to work with the city on matching the right zoning, and we pointed to this section here, as well as later in the chapter, some hand-drawn maps of what we think the land use should be. So things have progressed since then. 2010 came, we did the zoning code update, at about the same time, in our same area, we did another small area plan. This one was a station area plan for 38th and Blake, where the commuter rail is the first stop out of Union Station on the way to the airport. And we updated and replaced the Curtis Park neighborhood plan with the downtown, Northeast Downtown Neighborhoods Plan. Again, I just want to illustrate the breadth of topics that your neighborhood plan should have. A lot of the recent plans have an opening kind of few pages that show you a summary of all the recommendations. And so we have neighborhood connections and character, mobility, economic development, livability of the public realm, We've got some transformative concepts. Streetcar, 21st Street is a festival street, Curtis Street and Broadway to get special treatment. And in here, you'll see we've got land use recommendations. So again, there's going to be land use recommendations. How tall should buildings be? What kind of uses should be where? But notice it's really not the dominant feature here. So when you do neighborhood plans, look for that breadth. Here, by the way, is an illustration of what we're looking at for streetcar in our plan. We have light rail coming up and down the street. It's fine, it's great, but the way RTD has implemented light rail in Denver is really a regional connection. We like rail, everyone likes riding rail, but we want more of a local feel because we want to stop every couple blocks, whereas light rail stops on average about every mile and a half. And so we envision this loop going back and forth downtown, or maybe going to cities. When you work on a neighborhood plan, the city brings in a lot of resources to work with you. Depending on what your particular challenges are in the area, they'll bring experts from Public Works, they'll bring experts from Community Planning and Development, of course, Parks and Rec, etc. This was a diagram from our plan. I don't think any of us in the neighborhood understood this. When we were planning called the 38th and Blake Station Area Plan, we want all this development around our rail stations. This is an area of change. This is where we want to direct development to. Great, everybody's there. And people from Public Works said, do you realize that all the rainwater that falls going to 38th and Blake comes from this massive area? Here's Colorado Boulevard. Here's Monaco. This is massive. And all the rainwater that goes over the surface of our streets funnels right down trying to get to the river there. So yes, we can do development there, but we're also going to have to invest very significantly in stormwater systems. So that's, as the public, you are thinking 20 years from now. You're not thinking, what do you want today, or do I like this guy's project, or do I want that gal to have a project? You're thinking big picture, long term, and you have to consider the big picture elements. When we zoom into 38th and Blake, you have to deal with the reality of, okay, if we want a lot of activity here, there aren't even sidewalks. The red is where sidewalks are missing. So we documented where sidewalks are missing. Of course, the city doesn't build sidewalks, so it's a little bit, okay, now what next? But we've documented the problem. And we do talk about land use. I want to talk about, because we're going to set up the next session, which is on zoning. This is the page on land use. The colors in the middle of Curtis Park here is single-family row house, going to urban residential, going to industrial mixed use. Over here on the Welton corridor on Downing, we have transit-oriented development, and going to downtown, we have mixed use. But when we talk about zoning, we talk about land use, we also talk about how much, how intense, and the way we talk about it these days with the Denver zoning code is how high. So we spent a fair bit of time talking about, well, the predominant character in the stable historic neighborhood is about 2.5 stories. And then going up to 3 stories on the Lawrence-Larimer boundary, and then going up higher than that. Going to downtown, let's go to 12 stories and 20 stories as we get down towards 20th Street. And as we talked about this, we spent a long time talking about Welton Street. Again, thinking in the future. Welton Street has been not very active for a long time. What would we like to see? And this is a difference between neighborhoods that have neighborhood plans and neighborhoods that don't. Neighborhoods that have neighborhood plans bring everybody together and spend a long time talking about how's this going to work. So we were recommending 5 stories on Welton Street from Park Avenue right there up to 27th, and then, 8 stories from Park Avenue to 27th, then 5 stories up. And you might say, well, that's right next to your residential neighborhood. How is it okay with people, 8-story building towering right over them? And I've called out this text from another page. The plan also called for transitions when it's adjacent to low-scale residential neighborhoods. The buildings need to step down. They can't go from the alley line straight up. At least that's the recommendation in our plan. And as we'll learn about in the 3rd session, zoning follows planning. So with our planning calling for this, it was pretty comfortable. A couple of years later, when it came time to actually do the rezoning for the upper portion of Welton Street, to take it from 3 stories up to 5 stories, there was a brief discussion. Everybody looked at their plan and said, yep, that's what we agreed with. And I'm telling you, from the neighborhood, I was the only one who came to testify just to represent Curtis Park neighbors' position that we were for it, because there was no controversy. And And that's how it should work. Neighborhoods that don't have a neighborhood plan, not all the time, but I'm telling you, sitting in the planning board seat, quite often, you're reactive. You're reactive to every project. Do I like this one? Do I like that one? You want a neighborhood plan so you can take the time to calmly sit down and sketch out what you think the future should look like. Here's another example of sketching out what the future looks like. Most of you are probably very familiar with Cherry Creek and all the change going in Cherry Creek. You go down First Avenue and you turn and go down Spear, lots of new buildings, lots of new development. Lots of opinions out there about whether they like it. Some people are excited about it. Some people are like, oh my gosh, this isn't the Cherry Creek I used to know. What I think is it doing what the plan said? Cherry Creek has a neighborhood plan. The neighborhood spent a couple of years on this. It says, and I'm just zooming into a couple maps here, this is the residential neighborhood, Cherry Creek North. That should be urban residential, shading down here below 2nd Avenue into some regional center. And it should be fairly low scale, 3 stories. But if we zoom the map down a little bit, here's First, here's Steele. This should be regional center, and shading down into town center. You can read those definitions as to what kind of uses are in those. And you should be 12 stories on this corner, 8 stories along First, and then look at this gradient, shading down from 8 stories down to 4 stories. Plans don't have to be exact. They don't have to give you the technical detail of how and what the regulations are. That's for zoning. Here they were able to very clearly communicate an intent that the buildings step down as they approach the neighborhood. And I would say that what's happening in Cherry Creek today is exactly along the lines of this plan. And this plan, after a couple of years of being worked on in the neighborhood with the residents, the business owners, the property owners, came to planning board, no controversy, went to city council, no controversy. This is how it's supposed to work. Golden Triangle is another example of a recent neighborhood plan that has a lot of really interesting recommendations in it, but not a lot of land use recommendations because their land use was pretty much zoned the way they want it. So the recommendations reinforce what's already there. Instead, they spend their time on big picture topics. Here's Broadway. It's a beautiful illustration from the plan, envisioning what can be done with Broadway to make it more multimodal and inviting for people to spend time there, encouraging business, encouraging activity. So, you've got the transit on the right side as we have today, except it's given upgraded stations and it has its own painted lane. You have several lanes of traffic, but then you have 2 lanes going north and south of biking, buffered. The parking is on both sides still, and the parking is on this side, buffering the traffic from the bikes. This is now being demonstrated. It was demonstrated a few weeks ago on a portion of South Broadway, and designs are continuing to see if this can be implemented. Here's another thing. If you go up Spear, the diagonal that defines the Golden Triangle's western edge, you'll see all these funny remnant little triangles just because the north-south street grid and the diagonal Spear don't work well together. And the neighborhood said, well, what if we didn't want this? What if we wanted to make something of it? And they came up with short-term, to sort of make it crossable, give it some shade and let people sit there, all the way to long-term, reconnect it to the property adjacent and make it a plaza adjacent to a building because if we work with Public Works and figure out that that triangle isn't needed for people to turn across, we can really reclaim it and make it part of the neighborhood. So big picture thinking. Larry Swansea plan, a lot of recommendations in here on everything, including a lot of mobility recommendations. This is just an illustration of where bike boulevards should go, bike lanes, protected bike lanes, crossings, a lot of very detailed recommendations that then turn into a next step study for Public Works for implementation. And then this plan also has some specific recommendations for getting in and out of and across the National Western Center. This plan turned quickly into another small area plan for the National Western Center itself. Just an illustration of the kind of things that are recommended in the National Western Center. If you're reading about, vote for 2C, you might go to denvergov.org/planning and pull up this plan and read about the kind of things that are recommended to go there. It is a picture thinking with a lot of partners.
2A.
This is 2A.
2C. Oh, 2C.
This is C.
Sorry.
2A is the college one.
Oh, sorry.
And some beautiful illustrations. Because when we talk about planning, we say planning captures the vision. And if you have the budget to do it, capturing the vision is great with visuals. So this is some visuals from that plan, showing better connections through the center. So rather than being a place you wouldn't go unless you were going to the stock show because you can't get through there and there's nothing there for you, more of a year-round facility with good connections through it. And in this area where you see some kind of festival going on, possibly the kind of festival park Denver's always wanted. Rather than having loud concerts in City Park that disturbed all the neighbors around it, this somewhat isolated area could be a great place for it, in the same place that during the winter are pens for cattle, but are not used other times of the year, to make that a festival park. These are the kind of big picture thinking that go into our small area plans. I think you want a small area plan. How do you know if you have a small area plan? You go to denvergov.org/planning. There's a map on that page. You can scroll through the list of all the plans, but I'll warn you, they aren't all named intuitively. The 1987 plan for my neighborhood was the Curtis Park Plan. Everybody can find that. Now it's called the Northeast Downtown Neighborhoods Plan. It accurately describes the kind of collection of neighborhoods, but you would never pick that. Instead, put in your address or scroll around on the map, and it will tell you all the plans that apply. Comp Plan, Blueprint Denver, and if you have a small area plan, and there'll be a link, a PDF to that plan. But you might not have a plan. This is a map that's pretty stark. So if we say we'd like to have every neighborhood have a neighborhood plan, if we say we'd like to update them about every 15 years, so the planning horizon when you're doing the plan is imagining the future over the next 20 years, so let's update them every 15 years and keep that going. That's Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation's stated position, is every neighborhood should have a neighborhood plan updated every 15 years. And the CPD agrees, but CPD doesn't have that kind of funding yet. Please talk to your council people. Every neighborhood needs a neighborhood plan. So here's the current situation actually as of April 2014. So this doesn't have Elyria, Swansea, Globeville, and a couple stationary plans reflected. 22.3% as of April 2014 of the area in the city had a recent plan, recent from 2000 on, so within the last 15 years. The yellow areas have a plan, but it's up to 25 years old, 1990 and on. The orange areas have a plan that was adopted before 1990, so this is the bucket Curtis Park was in with our 87 plan before we updated it. And the red areas have no adopted plan, and that's 46% of the city. So we're behind. Now CPD has been doing a good job with the limited resources they have. Last time we met, we talked about areas of change and areas of stability as called in Blueprint Denver. Where do you think the limited funding that CPD has had to do plans has been directed? The blue hatched areas show areas of change per Blueprint Denver, and it overlaps heavily with green and yellow areas. And then this should be green now because Elyria, Swansea, Globeville have plans now. So they've been making the right choices with the limited funding. But because I don't work for the city, and I can just tell you my opinion, please, over the years, talk to your council people, ask for a plan for your neighborhood, ask for there to be more funding for all neighborhoods to have a plan, and when it's time to do your plan, make sure everybody gets involved. These plans are powerful. They do steer the direction of the city.
Thanks, Joel. I'm Steve Nalley. I'm the Neighborhood Planning Supervisor in Community Planning and Development. I've been with the city for going on 8 years and have played a role in, 15 plans, small area plans to date. They're really exciting. Every plan is a little bit different. Every neighborhood is very unique, and we have to adapt our approach to that neighborhood. But there's one thing that's consistent with our approach, and it's about the future. We are planning for the future. We typically look 20 years into the future. So we ask, what is this neighborhood going to be in 20 years? What should it be? What should change? What should stay pretty much the same? And so I have an example of an area of our city where we took a 20-year vision. This is an aerial image from 1956. You guys probably can't see that of lower downtown area. Union Station is right here. Wow. It doesn't look like that today. This area here was all rail and industrial land. There were viaducts that came out of downtown and went through the valley, went over South Platte and into the Highland neighborhood. In 1992, We did some planning. We envisioned something different. Now there's more history to this. I'm going to skip over that. It included the Olympics, but we won't talk about that. So as you can see, there's a lot of green space. There's a lot of it's a built environment. There are streets. Union Station's still there. There's some train that's still there. So there was a vision, and this is what the vision represents or look like. So in 1995, not much had changed. You can notice that rail was consolidated, which was a big deal. That was a big step towards implementation. But otherwise, it looks fairly the same. You can see a lot of downtown has been demoed. We have the site for future Forest Field. Some things are starting to happen downtown. In 2000, there's a new park, and it looks a lot like the park that was envisioned along the river. And you no longer have the 16th Street Viaduct. It's gone. In 2012, I think you guys, if you've been around the city for a few years, it looks even different today than it does in this map, but it's really starting to look a lot like that 1992 plan. So 20 years later, we would not write the same plan for this area that we wrote 20 years ago. So why do we do a neighborhood plan? It engages the neighborhood in a dialogue about the future. Where are we going as a neighborhood? It defines a vision and identifies how to achieve it. It guides future growth and funnels new development in appropriate areas. It protects and enhances existing neighborhoods. It informs our decision making. Our being the city, where we focus our efforts, where we try to get funding, where we initiate text amendments, or it informs our decisions for rezoning, as Joel mentioned, but also the private sector. It's a signal to the private sector that this is what the neighborhood wants, and the plan reflects it. It also creates links between important neighborhood systems. So again, it's not just about land use, it's about the transportation network, it's about the infrastructure network. Joel presented the stormwater slide where the water has to make it to the river somehow, and they're all interconnected. The land use patterns relate to the transportation network and relate to the open space network. Who knows how many neighborhoods we have in Denver? Who knows? Take a guess. 78. Nice. 78. 78 neighborhoods in Denver. And so when we do a neighborhood plan, oftentimes it is the statistical neighborhood, one of the 78. This is an example of the Westwood neighborhood plan, where it is the statistical neighborhood. Who knows how many stations we have in the city of Denver? Count them up really fast. Take a guess. 31. 41 stations in Denver. So sometimes we do a station area plan, just a half mile around the station platform. This is an example of the Evans station. These circles represent the quarter mile and a half mile, which is typically a 10-minute walk, a half mile. Now, that doesn't mean the infrastructure is in place to actually walk in 10 minutes to the station. We'll talk about that in a second. Sometimes, and this is the Elyria-Swansea plan, sometimes multiple stations within a statistical neighborhood. So within the Elyria-Swansea plan, there's the 40th and Colorado station area plan, there's the National Western station area plan, there are portions of the 38th and Blake station area plan. And then another scale that we focus on is an area plan. So this is downtown. There are multiple statistical neighborhoods represented here. Parts of Five Points, Golden Triangle, it's called Civic Center, but I'll call it Golden Triangle. CBD, the Union Station neighborhood, Auraria, they're all represented here, and this is part of a larger area plan. We also do corridor plans, so this is East Colfax, focusing between, I think, Sherman and just beyond Colorado Boulevard, and then one block north and south of Colfax, and what those blocks mean. But how do we build a plan? We start with forming a city team, and the city team is community planning and development, public works, parks and rec, environmental health, Office of Economic Development, and then other agencies or departments as necessary, depending on the neighborhood. we go and we hold a kickoff meeting. And we're informed by council, and we do a lot of outreach, which I'll talk about in a second, and try to get as many people to these meetings. And we ask the question, what do you like about your neighborhood? What do you want to change? And it kind of informs a SWOT analysis, or strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. What are those things in your neighborhood? And we ask folks at that kickoff public meeting, who should sit on our steering committee, which is a smaller subset of leaders from the community that meet more often and cover more topics. So this includes residents, employees, employers, property owners, see the list, religious groups, schools, and then obviously existing neighborhood groups if they exist. So we ask, what do you like about your neighborhood? But then we start our visioning session and we say, how do we strengthen what you like about your neighborhood? How do we make better what you are concerned about with your neighborhood? And then what do you need, want, or need in the future? And we create a vision. And we ask questions like this. Fill in the blank. We have boards at the public meetings, and we get a lot of interesting comments. We also ask questions like this, or statements. I love Golden Triangle because it feels original. And so our follow-up question to that is, okay, elaborate. Tell us what you mean by that, and how do we strengthen that? We flyer neighborhoods. Not everyone has email. Not everyone has access to a computer. We also do it in multiple languages. This is Spanish and Vietnamese for the Sun Valley neighborhood. And asking questions, what will make your future bright? Trying to get folks to engage in a conversation about their neighborhood. The plans are built by the community. A lot of this, what we're doing right now, a lot of presentations, a lot of pulling out markers and poring over maps, surveys, and there are exercises that we do. So this is an exercise for land use, and we're actually going to do a very similar exercise tonight. What types of housing are needed in the neighborhood? Where should housing be located? So single family, duplex, live, work, row house, accessory dwelling unit, these are all pieces. Where do they go in the neighborhood? Same thing with services. We heard a lot from the Blair-Caldwell Planning Academy that we need services in the neighborhood, especially health services. I'm not sure what happened. It's a little unhealthy. Sorry about that. Also, what types of employment should be attracted to the neighborhood and where? So retail, live, work, manufacturing, transit-oriented development, office, these types of land uses. So we take these ideas, we create alternatives, and those alternatives then become recommendations that land in the plan. There's a lot of back and forth with the community. This is a conversation we had in Leary Swansea about row houses and where they're appropriate. So there is that back and forth and confirmation review of these ideas. You may recognize this person, bicycle, Andrew Burns. So this is a Coma Street in the Golden Triangle. It doesn't have these markings, it's actually chalk. This is a demonstration project where you paint the street and you say, this is what it feels like to have a protected bike lane. I can tell you all about a protected bike lane, I can show you pictures, but when you get on a bike and you experience it, that's when you feel that change, and you either love it or you hate it, but at least you felt it and can experience it. So the adoption process, take all these ideas and recommendations, put them into a plan document, take that plan document to planning board for approval, and then ultimately to city council for adoption. This is what a lot of our documents have a plan on the page where you have kind of this vision element, a connected neighborhood, and what that means and the strategies that are related to connectivity. What project would lead us to the vision or get us one step closer to the vision? What would transform this neighborhood in the direction that the plan is stating? This is what City Council looks like. This is a neighborhood. This is actually a student of Bruce Randolph School speaking on behalf of the Leary Swansea neighborhood. So we present these plans and hope for adoption from City Council. So what are the key topics? I think we've kind of hit this a lot, and Joel hit this, but What that is. Sorry about that. But we mentioned, I believe Sarah mentioned areas of change, areas of stability, and how it has changed in Cherry Creek. So these images are from the Cherry Creek area plan. Prior to the Cherry Creek area plan, these were the areas of change in 2002, that cross hatch. After the plan was adopted in 2012, it was reduced drastically. So the neighborhood was an area of stability, and the shopping center was, and Cherry Creek North was still part of that area of change, and then Cherry Creek Triangle. And so we do that in area plans as well. That then informs Blueprint Denver map. We also get into the details of land use, which I think Joel has hit, and we'll talk more about in our exercise. Building heights map, and in even more detail about active edges. What are the streets that are signature, and how do the buildings need to address those streets? So those 3 slides, I'll back up again. So land use, 4 slides. Area stability, area of change, land use, building heights, and more of the urban design elements are all things that inform a future zone district. Plans also address that half mile. So I mentioned as the crow flies, you may not be able to walk in 10 minutes. And here's an example of that. This is 40th in Colorado. We are looking at what's in purple here is a 10-minute walk. That's not the entire half mile. So by introducing new street connections across the rail, the person that lives here can now walk within 10 minutes to the station. Before, that person was probably 20 minutes away. We also address things like parks and the network of parks, how the parks are connected to each other. We also do health impact assessments. We assess the impact on health. How does the recommendation in the plan impact health? If we're making the neighborhood more walkable, is that healthier, or does it make the neighborhood potentially unhealthy? So we're weighing the recommendations in a plan and suggestions for the built environment and how they will impact health. So what happens after a plan? There are infrastructure investments, again, there's zoning, and there are partnerships. And partnerships are critical to implementing plan recommendations. We also have this handy thing that we're trying out, and this is a pilot we're doing in Globally Responsive, which is a dashboard. How is the neighborhood doing after the plan? How many of the recommendations have been implemented? What phase are those implementation strategies in currently? And how complex are they? There's definitely complexity differences, like building a bridge over a railroad. That's very complex. Dealing with the railroads. Updating the Blueprint Denver map based on the recommendations in the plan. That's not complex. So there are things that take more time, take more money, that are more complex, and there are other things that we can do pretty quickly. And we'd love to get to a point where we have a dashboard for every single neighborhood in the city that says this is where it stands, this is how much it's been implemented. So other things, and Joel gave you a few numbers. These are updated numbers based on Blueprint. So 100% of the city is covered by Blueprint. 39% of the city has no small area plan. And 23% of the city hasn't adopted a plan since 2002. So some of the challenges that we're facing as a department, as a city, and why not every single neighborhood has a plan, is there's lack of predictability in the work plan for completing a small area plan. So we may go into a neighborhood and just issues that we weren't anticipating, and it takes us 3 years. There are limited resources to keep pace with the changing conditions. We want to be ahead of those conditions. We want to be proactive with our plans. We want to anticipate where that change is happening. We have inconsistency in planning process timelines, which I've mentioned on the first bullet, with limited resources to tailor engagement to neighborhoods. So every neighborhood responds differently to engagement. I think person responds differently. Not everyone has email. Not everyone cares what we're doing. They think their neighborhood's fine. Who cares what the city's doing? Some people don't want to show up to a meeting where the government is there talking about their neighborhood. Also, we have difficulty in prioritizing implementation across the entire city. So we'll adopt the neighborhood plan, and we're like, let's go, let's implement everything in this neighborhood plan, but we have a whole city and we have a limited budget. And then holding non-city implementers accountable is difficult. I guess an example of this would be asking the neighborhood to tell us what they need. Asking the neighborhood or asking your neighbor to pick up the trash or things that aren't necessarily in our ordinances. That's tough for us to hold them accountable. But there are a lot of recommendations and plans that do hold non-city folks accountable. So that's something that we need to talk about. Some of the goals moving forward, more of a predictable multi-year work plan. So you all can go online and say, okay, I'm getting my neighborhood plan in 3 years from now. I know when it's coming. I'm going to start organizing folks, getting ready for it. Maybe we can start identifying some of our issues, what we love, what we want to change. But you will be able to anticipate and it will be more predictable. That's a goal. Also the proactive strategy ahead of those changing conditions, which I addressed, effective ways to engage all citizens. Really challenging. And consistent and streamlined process for all plans. A systematic citywide process for implementation and prioritizing those projects, and then tracking, measuring the progress of implementation, which is that dashboard. So I have a question for you all. What do you think, what one thing or what indicators would inform our department of where we should do a neighborhood plan next? What are some topics that you think that would inform us of where to do a neighborhood next?
It's the last one.
Okay, how old is it, or does it have a plan? What else? What else should we do?
The area has a high level of development going on.
Okay, a lot of changes happening. Yeah.
The demand in the neighborhood, so how many people are asking for it and how many people want to participate in it.
Everyone, all at once. Okay. So that's good. What else? Any other thoughts? Yeah, Keith.
The administration has ambitious plans for creation of new subsidized housing. And it's not clear where all of this housing is going to go. There's a lot of talk about how many thousands of units will need to be created and so forth, and what the shortage is. But we never hear where these things are going on, who's planning this.
Okay.
I would think that neighborhoods which do not have up-to-date plans, but which are targets, should be prioritized.
Okay. So a little more certainty in where citywide policies may apply at the neighborhood level. So we've been thinking a lot about this, and we have created some indicators related to these 5 topics, through them. So livability, what's the quality of life of the neighborhood? What's the health? There are a number of health indicators that inform us of the general quality of life and the livability index. Investment, this gets to the amount of development that's happening or not happening, and the percent change or decline. Policy and regulation, where is there a plan now? How old is that plan? Where do we not have a plan? And then also, where is there conflict between the zoning and what Blueprint Denver is saying? Demographics, major shift in demographics. A lot of people are moving in, or a lot of people are moving out. And then the economy, it's the poverty level, is that changing drastically, and other indicators that are informing us. So that's what we're working on, and we've asked for funding in the 2016 budget for full-time employees and a little bit of money to really get this work program started, and we're really excited with what the next few years will entail. And I think it's now time for a break. Evelyn? When do we return?
We have 10 minutes.
Okay.
10 minutes. Actually, we finished a little bit early.
Okay.
Sorry, I went to the restroom. So we have an option. We can take some questions now if you're comfortable doing that. We had budgeted until 7:10, so we've actually got 15 minutes.
Okay, good.
So, questions?
I'll stand over here out of reach. Sure.
Yeah.
Is there a mic on your table? Yeah. I'm sure you can speak up.
what would be the response if all of us representing different neighborhoods next week appeal to your office for a neighborhood plan? I mean, how quickly can you all, sort it out, do triage, and put us in the queue?
Right, I think that's already happening now. Like that, everyone is reaching out asking for a neighborhood plan, and you saw the challenges that we're facing in the resource strain and our ability to. I mean, we can't write a neighborhood plan for every single neighborhood. We just can't do it. And so the neighborhood planning initiative is establishing that work plan that will give us certainty and predictability of where the next neighborhood plan is. We're working on it. We don't have an answer yet, but there are things that you can do in anticipation for a neighborhood plan. I mentioned a few of them. Define your issues. A lot of those issues may not need to be addressed by a neighborhood plan. Also, when the planners show up in your neighborhood to start that neighborhood plan, you've already defined all your issues and you've done your SWOT analysis, and that saves us time and you'll have your plan finished faster. Reach out to folks. Try to identify other leaders in the neighborhood. Try to have a conversation with them. Again, one of our biggest challenges is reaching everyone in a neighborhood and getting all of the voices heard. Phil?
I would say if you're motivated to ask CPD for a neighborhood plan, please do so, but please also ask your council person. Your council people are elected, and they want to do what their electorate wants. And if they're hearing more and more of their neighborhoods who don't have neighborhood plans want them, it's going to become a priority for budget that will give CPD the resources needed to do more neighborhood plans. If we have 78 neighborhoods, and we have to do, and we're going to do every neighborhood getting a neighborhood plan updated every 15 years. And there's some oversimplifying assumptions in here, right? Are they always neighborhood plans? Are they always such things? But just work with me here. That means we have to do 5 or 6 per year. And we're not resourced to do 5 or 6 per year. So if you're motivated to get a neighborhood plan, please include your council person. They can be asking for a priority, and they can also be saying among their peers, this is a priority. Priority for your district too. Your district too? Oh my gosh. Maybe this should be a priority in the budget.
Joel, you might be best to answer this. As you're working with a neighborhood plan that's not old but a little bit older, and people move in and out of the neighborhood, and some people were involved in the neighborhood plan, and some people didn't live there when it happened, or some people did live there and weren't involved, or were involved and changed their mind. What strategies have you found successful for living with a neighborhood plan that the planning board is relying on and city council is relying on if not everyone is in complete harmony about everything that's in the neighborhood plan?
It's interesting. It's roughly a generation. I mean, you expect a generation to grow up and another generation to get slightly older and slightly older. And so there will be changes in opinions. And so that's why the goal is to update it more frequently. But what we found in Curtis Park, we were getting good stuff done. All the things I chose to put red boxes around, maybe I didn't emphasize this enough, are all things we got done. We got the Stike Highway taken out. We got the landmark district created. We got police to come when we called. And over time, it became a little more tactical. It became a little more, oh gosh, yeah, weren't things terrible back then? Well, that's been handled, or it got solved by itself, or people aren't feeling so strong about that. And just pick and choose what you want to focus on. If your neighborhood has a work plan, the things you want to work on, things that your neighbors are saying to work on, look for those things in your neighborhood plan, because that'll give you an extra boost when you ask the city to say, let's work on these things. Right.
Yes, Joel. We have Overland Park has a neighborhood plan. It's a little elderly now. But what my question is we have a lot of parks in our neighborhood. And the parks don't come under planning and zoning. They come they're now under the Parks Department and under the director of the Parks Department. So when we try to make a neighborhood plan with I think we have 4 or 5 parks just in our neighborhood, do we have to network with both the Parks Director and the Planning Board to get our neighborhood plan approved as regards parks?
No, the answer is no. While plans are done within CPD, They cover all kinds of topics, but it's CPD that leads the planning effort, and they involve Public Works and Parks and everybody else when a plan is done. There may be recommendations in your plan, or your new plan you're hoping to do pertaining to parks, and I would encourage you to put all the topics you can in there. But in terms of prioritizing getting a neighborhood plan, it's not the Parks Department that is the gatekeeper on that.
Thank you.
Just to add to that, in our neighborhood, I'm in the same neighborhood as Ray, but we had in 2009, it was the Evans Light Rail Station plan. Now, would that be something that becomes adopted?
Yes, yes.
That is, okay.
All the kinds of plans that Steve talked about, there's neighborhood plan, a stationary plan, corridor plan.
That's the
From Blueprint
station.
Denver's perspective, they're all small area plans, and they're adopted as supplements to the company.
A question for Steve. So, if we're doing 5 or 6 neighborhood plans a year, what are we doing in 2016?
We are not, we're probably not. but-
Kendra Black keeps telling us she's working on it for our area, but surely somebody's getting a small area plan in 2016.
So that's a great question. So I mentioned the budget request. The budget has not been approved yet. What's currently in the mayor's budget that is then going to city council for adoption or approval. We will get more resources in the middle of 2016. By the time July comes around, we will know exactly what we're going to do and which neighborhood we're going to start with. I can't answer the question right now, though.
Which neighborhood or which neighborhoods?
Which neighborhoods?
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I have a question on your neighborhood planning analysis, particularly the investment. What was the combination of investment that was integrated with your planning these neighborhoods? Was it public-private combination, mostly public, mostly private?
This is on the indicators?
Yes. And how were they chosen? And was there any preferable engagement with minority companies?
So we tried to identify indicators or data sets that were drastically different. And so what I mean by that is if a investment, a private investment, a lot of new buildings, a lot of permits were being pulled in a particular neighborhood, if that indicator was the same as, let's say,
Land value.
yeah, land value, then we wouldn't use the same. We wouldn't use both of them. We'd pick one. So we want different indicators that try to inform us of where to go next. But the investment is really permits, valuation of permits, the amount of change happening within a particular neighborhood, and that's how we define investment. If you have a suggestion, we're open. If you have another idea of how we should measure that. But we were finding that was a pretty good indicator of where investment was happening in the city.
I have a question on this same slide here. So when you describe like these 5 factors for determining which area may be some of the neighborhood plan that you're going to work with, on livability, you said that it's either based on like a high quality of life or low quality of life. Which one of those areas is going to receive the preference treatment for neighborhood plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. So walkability is one of the indicators of livability.
Okay, so
if it's not walkable, then we need to do a neighborhood plan.
Okay.
If it is very walkable, there's not much more we can do through a planning effort.
Okay, and so down the list then on investment, is that an area that has a high interest in investing, or are you going to give preference to an area that doesn't have an interest in investing?
So for that particular one, it's both. We consider both. If there's no investment happening in an area, we want to know why. And if there are recommendations from strategies from a neighborhood plan that can address why nothing's happened. And then also the other side, if a ton of change is happening, we should also address that. And the same would go for demographics and economy at both ends of that as well. Declining population, increasing population.
Okay, so a stagnant area of demographic change is not going to get as much interest in a neighborhood plan.
I mean, again, it's the 5. It's the 5 indicators. So something, if it's a stagnant area for demographics where we're not seeing population shift, I guess we could probably deduce that there's not a lot of investment.
This is my chance to editorialize, because it's not allowed to. CPD has had so little funding to do neighborhood plans, and only a few get done per year. And how do they get decided? Well, the department, as I said, says, well, areas of change needs them the most, and politics, city council, who's screaming the loudest gets it. This is an attempt, and it's an early, you're seeing a preview here, of what if we had enough funding and a rubric for deciding rationally who goes first, but not in a scarcity where nobody's going to, people aren't going to get neighborhood plans that we've been in an era where we're moving towards everybody getting neighborhood plans, just having a rational basis for choosing it. I'm not so naive to think that politics won't play a part. Talk to your council person, but this I think is a move towards an attempt to have some indicators that can be discussed that would be rational.
Okay, thank you both.
I just have more of a comment than anything else. I think it's important to understand as a neighborhood that when you want a small area plan, you have to realize that it takes a lot of effort on the part of the residents in the neighborhood. It's not CPD's job. It really is a collaborative effort between CPD and the neighborhood. And then, as a follow-up, you can't just let the plan sit. You have to keep looking at it as a guide. And as new people move into the neighborhood, they aren't even aware that there's a plan. So there's a certain amount of institutional memory that needs to be passed along to people that move in. And that really is a neighborhood's job. It doesn't end with getting planted.
Thanks, that's really good.
Maybe going along with that, you mentioned a while ago about the neighborhood defining their issues, and then as an aside, you said, do these issues need to be addressed in the neighborhood plan? What would the neighborhood could deal with in a different way, possibly, rather than through there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think an example of that could be, we want a new playground in our park. We want a walking path around our park. We want sidewalks. Give me some more examples, Joel.
Yeah, there's, maybe I could reframe it into saying there's probably nothing that you couldn't get done in a neighborhood without a neighborhood plan. But your likelihood of getting it done, of having the city's priority on it, is much greater if it's called for a neighborhood plan. That doesn't mean stop. Or if you have a neighborhood plan, it doesn't have the playground that you want. It doesn't mean don't talk to Parks and Rec. Oh, talk to Parks and Rec. Be the squeaky wheel. Absolutely. But if you can get on the list, get a recent neighborhood plan, and come as a neighborhood, it doesn't have to be the first meeting, but during the course of it, and with all your ideas and priorities, and discuss them and figure out which ones rise to the top, get those in your neighborhood plan, and much more likely to get the attention for implementation.
So is there a neighborhood plan for the parks?
Neighborhood plans, the area that the neighborhood plan defines encompasses everything in that area, and there may be recommendations for the parks. There's a whole nother plan that's kind of a sister to Blueprint Denver called Game Plan, that's kind of comprehensively what's Parks and Rec's goals for parks. But your park in your neighborhood may well have specific recommendations in your neighborhood plan.
I think you guys know what you're saying.
How does a neighborhood, and I don't even know what neighborhood this would be, but I volunteer with there's no strong leader for that neighborhood. There's probably a lot of transients. The immigrants really need to have a nice quality of life and walkability, and I think about where their complex is. They have to cross 13th Street or 13th Avenue, which is a one-way, fast cars to get to a park. There's no crosswalks, there's no stoplight. I think there's even been an incident where a mom and a couple of kids were killed a couple years ago trying to cross that. So how do those kinds of neighborhoods get a plan and some people behind it to speak up for them?
So I think that's a great question, and again, we'll look at these indicators about the built environment, and we will use every approach that we know to reach out to folks to get their input. A few examples from O'Leary Swansea, which was also very challenging to get the voice heard. we would go to parent-teacher, it was the principal of Swansea Elementary School, when the principal was meeting with the parents, because the parents were there. It was our opportunity to talk to them, because the parents would not necessarily come to our public meeting. The schools were great. Also, the churches were really good and allowed us to come in and place flyers in the church and try to talk to residents, setting up tents at bazaars that are already taking place in the neighborhood. So going to meetings that are already taking place was successful for us. But those are our most challenging neighborhoods to hear the voice, and
Especially when so many of them speak Burmese,
Sure.
Malaysian, Pakistani. I mean, there's not even an English and Spanish. It's multiple languages.
Yeah, and I think we had, in the Sun Valley neighborhood, I think we had, I don't remember, but it was over 5 languages. And we had over 5 different interpreters. And it was real-time interpretation with headsets. So I'm standing here talking, while 5 other people are also talking into a mic, and they're hearing it in their native language. But if you have other ideas, we're open, always.
One of the things I was really optimistic hearing the planning board when the Elyria Swansea plan came in is the people that came to present, and a lot of people that had input into the plan, were saying this has been such a good experience getting together and realizing we can ask for things, realizing we can prioritize things, and they were beginning to feel a little bit of power. One of the recommendations of the plan, if I recall correctly, is there should be an ongoing organized neighborhood organization. May not have used those terms, but we should continue this process of some place to get together to work on our priorities together. And they realize that they've been missing that. And it doesn't always spontaneously occur. Sometimes a plan like this, a process like this, gives people a taste of it. They say, "Oh, this is good. We should do more of this."
Okay, so I'm going to be the timekeeper here. The bad news, I don't know. The news is that we're at break time, so you all have about 15 minutes to wander around for a minute. And then the good news is we actually have time programmed after break to have a little bit of additional Q&A since we wrapped up the presentation more quickly than we had anticipated. I have a question for folks here. How many of you have been involved in any type of neighborhood planning conversation within the city and county of Denver? All right, everybody who doesn't have your hand up, look at those that do have your hand up, because you're going to have about 15 minutes of time now to wander around and hit up those folks around you who have some experience. They may be a great resource, sort of a peer-to-peer resource, which we're hoping is really one of the benefits of convening you all with the Citizens Planning Academy, is having the chance to have conversations amongst yourselves. So you have a chance to either go outside, catch some fresh air, check out the view from this 3rd story, look up and down the Welton corridor. I do want to encourage you to take a look at the exhibits behind me. I'm about to run through and turn back on all the loud exhibits that I turned off while these guys were speaking. And we'll reconvene in about 15 minutes. So it's 7:14 right now, 7:30. We'll see you back there. Oh,
Ray, what street is this, you think? 50th, or what's Woodwalk? What do you think that street is? Yeah, 40.
Single lane, lots of driving,
So we might add
people are going to any sort of like public meetings or even like big events like that. I'm just curious if CPD's looked into any sort of like technological ways to reach folks. I know not everyone has internet access, but it does seem like an easier, also low-cost way when you have limited resources to maybe engage more people.
Yes. Is this on? Yes.
Okay. Question. Yeah. Anyone else? No, it is true. I mean, there's a whole host of technology out there. There's social media that we can tap into to try and reach a broader audience, not just the folks that have the time to make it to a meeting. So, you know, things as simple as like Nextdoor. How many of you are involved in Nextdoor or on the Nextdoor site for your neighborhood? So that's one way to sort of reach out to folks, for example. But, you know, as Steve said, any suggestions you have, honest to God, we're open to it. I mean, short of us like buying commercial time during the Super Bowl or American Idol, you know, where we could reach out and folks could definitely, we have a high likelihood that folks would see those ads. You know, we're out there using existing channels of community organizations, social organizations. We broadcast on our newsletter. We broadcast through the RNO distribution email lists. We have information on our website, so we're open to any and all suggestions for how to reach a broader audience. So.
I guess I mean like for dual communication, so I think using things like social media to get the message out to more people is great, but ways that they can engage back with CPD besides just you putting out, we were able to let more people know about the meeting we're having, but you still kind of have to show up.
Yeah.
Like ways for them to send feedback without showing up.
So one tool that we have used, we used it for the Brighton Boulevard corridor probably 4 or 5 years ago now. And it was just a web page, and you can just post your idea. Anyone that got to that web page, they just click on there's a map. You click on the map and you post your idea of what you think should be there or facility type should be there. And so we tried that. It was successful. Getting that website to everyone was then the challenge.
Sure.
But those are types of things we've explored.
All right. Great. I used up our 5 minutes of Q&A. So now we'll move on to the exercise.
I waited the whole other Q&A, so I don't feel bad.
No, you should not feel bad. And if you have other questions, obviously we're here to answer as they come up. If you're not comfortable in the group setting, find one of us offline as well. So with that, you can see in front of you at these 2 tables. I don't know if we've equally distributed ourselves here, so we may have to do some recalibration there, but we've got 2 exercises that Steve has lovingly prepared for you all. So we'll give Steve a few minutes to walk you through the different exercises. You're each going to have a chance at both. So we want to make sure we have sort of equal distribution between the 2 tables, because you'll get a chance to do both exercises. And with that, Steve, if you want to just sort of walk people through, give them the instructions.
Sure. All right. So 2 very different exercises. One is focusing on land use. One is focusing on the right-of-way and what to do within the right-of-way. Right-of-way. So I'll start with land use because that's the first slide. This is a typical process that or exercise that we do in neighborhoods to try to get consensus around where things should go in the neighborhood and how the land should be used. So you have a number of pieces, and you guys should listen to this too because you're going to participate in this 15 minutes from now. You have multiple pieces, and the pieces are reflected on the screen here, representing different types of housing, single unit, accessory dwelling units, townhouses, multi-unit. You also have commercial. Where is commercial appropriate? You have Main Street, you have mixed use, you may have commercial there that you don't use. That's your choice, like drive-through or edge neighborhood or edge retail, which has a little bit more parking kind of in the front than Main Street. Recreation, so a playground, a plaza, natural area, play fields. There are some green spaces already on the map, but it doesn't mean you are limited to putting the playgrounds within those green spaces. And then civic uses. So this is things such as a community garden or a community center or a rec center, a performing arts center, and job training or a school. Now these pieces were informed by the Westwood neighborhood. And you're looking at the Westwood neighborhood. Those pieces reflect what people want to see in their neighborhood, and we're now in the part of the planning phase where it's within the neighborhood. So you guys are going to have a conversation. You may not know the neighborhood, and that may make you feel a little uncomfortable where things should go. But put your planning cap on and think about where these land uses fall. You have a glue stick, stick them on the map. Yes.
2 questions about that. One is, you just said a half mile is a
10-minute walk, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
How big a cross is that?
Scale. So we're probably looking at probably a mile.
It's a mile and a half.
Probably 2 miles,
2 miles wide by a mile and a half high?
approximately.
All right, and then are there any light rail or anything going through there besides what we would know about buses on the main streets?
No. Buses on the main streets.
Okay.
You got it.
Thank you.
All right, so you guys listen to the, oh, yes, please.
What about the existing zoning? How does this fit into what that dictates by zoning?
So that's something to consider, but you shouldn't allow the future vision to be controlled by what's on the ground today necessarily. So think about the future and reach consensus as a group as to what the neighborhood should be in the future, not what it is today. Now, if you want it to be the same and you want it to reflect the zoning, that's also fine if that's the goal and the consensus that's reached in the group. So maybe you are just putting single family down throughout areas that are single family today. That's fine. That's part of the exercise.
Because that makes it feel like the zoning code update was like, oh well, that was just then and it's up for grabs. I mean that's what it makes me feel that maybe I'm.
So we are thinking about the future. The zoning code reflected the plans, mostly reflected the plans that were in place at the time. We're creating a new plan. We're creating a new vision. And so a lot of the things that were mapped in the zoning, I'm sure, will remain relevant. But think about the future and how it may change or not change. That's the exercise. Okay? Did you want to respond?
Nope.
Okay, so then the right-of-way game, you have a fixed right-of-way, meaning the public property or public rights-of-way where the public moves through, right? So you have travel lanes, you have sidewalks, you have maybe some other things to consider. Currently on this map, you have 60 feet of right-of-way. That's not a lot. This is a challenging game. You have a number of pieces that are all to scale. Sidewalks, bike lanes, tree lawns, travel lanes, transit, medians. It doesn't all fit within 60 feet, so it's a conversation about trade-offs. It's a conversation about what you value within the right-of-way. And it's also, could be a realization that maybe we need to widen the right-of-way to get these elements. Maybe 60 feet isn't wide enough for what we want, but that means we're buying private property to make that happen, which is a very difficult process. So if you come to that realization in this game, then you're kind of breaking the rules. The rules of the game are to stay within the lines.
So I'm just thinking, compared to Colfax over here and near Capitol Hill, what 60 feet? Is that wider than Colfax?
That's narrower. So Colfax is 80, 85 feet.
Okay.
Yeah. Hamden is probably 120 feet. Okay.
60 is a typical neighborhood street.
Right. Yeah. 60 is a typical collector street. A local street, a local neighborhood street is typically 48-ish, so even smaller.
All right. Maybe I'm missing something, but this doesn't look like a typical neighborhood to me.
Right.
This looks like an industrial area and lots of parking lots. So give us a feel for what's all around here so that we know what's needed by right of way.
And that's a great point. Oftentimes when we're doing this exercise in neighborhoods, they know what they're looking at. So that is going to be a challenge for us. What you are looking at is Washington Street in the Globeville neighborhood between 49th and 50th. And the vision for the land use along Washington is to be something different. Is to be mixed use, is to have more of a Main Street feel that's walkable, where you have not necessarily heavy industrial.
I
looks like you've got parking area, the local parking mixed with vision there.
One to one.
Like a main street,
So
like
if it's 60 feet
corridors,
wide,
you know, it's like buildings, basic stuff, street. None of the parking lots like right off the street, it's kind of like that main street area.
And not to give it away, but the problem was in the plan, we wanted biking, we wanted tree lawns, we wanted sidewalks, we wanted parking, because parking activates kind of whatever businesses are there. So we had like about 120 feet by the time.
From that central district that we have there.
I think maybe you can go from there. And those were what we
and the
wanted.
mixed use stuff, and then moving out into more like that.
There is no transit plan here if you wanted to put it.
So it would be seeing things like.
That can be shared. It can be shared with cars. It could be bus.
In between there.
It could be a shared transit. It could be a bus line.
So this could be like a dedicated bus line?
It could be that. It could also go in traffic.
These are shared.
Cars get creative in the pieces.
That's where you drive the greens.
Oh, I see, these are patios. This is a patio.
That connection to the remainder of
See, the other thing anything could happen from that end of Morrison Road to essentially Alameda and I-45 or the 6 and Federal there to tie all of that together. This neighborhood would blow up.
The problem was it's really
So what is this? It's really awesome. But what do you recommend for that?
So what I'd like to see there is, do we have something about like transit-oriented design? Because 2 bus lines meet right there, the 3 and the 4 meet right there. Yes, and both of them go to the light rail station. So yeah, exactly. Some multi-use stuff, something that makes that maybe, you know, like a transit hub. People can walk to that location and then live in that area and not need a car.
That could also be performing arts area too.
Right, because something like that. That's right. And that helps influence like the 18-hour use district that you want to see like mixed use.
Could we actually put the community center kind of more deeply into the residential so that it's easy to access by the school, for the schools?
I think that absolutely makes sense. Just go ahead and choose that option there.
Possibly. And that way, yeah, so put it right there, kind of.
So there's a sidewalks.
Schools sit vacant all summer, all evening. You know, you can
But there could be requirements as the spaces grow, right? So if they're thinking that this is gonna be long-term use, it's probably likely that a lot of these are commercial, right? So then you can then incorporate some changes where you require sidewalks or building change required by the
So in other words, if I want to keep this within its current hybrid usage,
Is this really the only playground? Is this really the only neighborhood that's right there? But I'm thinking there's a lot here that has to get
But I think the idea is like here, how the
well, more of it than
and the thing is also,
I think you got to change this property to a restaurant.
here they're kind of so then you do the unless they open up the same.
I know, it's hard.
I remember that class. In the corridors, though. Why do you just like, no, it's a corridor. I think that makes sense.
Westwood Park in the middle of this neighborhood, the material on
service code.
That's what it is now.
Well, but I think he's talking about Main Street.
Yeah, we can redesign this? Yes, cool.
You don't have to.
I don't think parking we'll put in speed bumps.
And you have dedicated bike lanes, you have all those things.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's the difference between
That was
Main Street
but maybe.
business and.
And that,
You're gonna be parking and all sorts of around.
Right, so I just want to just quickly point out that this right here is typically a lead.
oh, no, we're just right.
Oh, I thought you guys are widening. It's following the rules.
You don't want to sit that way.
Right.
I don't think we need three lanes.
You don't want to have a
Four lanes of traffic, you're gonna impact all the people around here. This is a major route, the only route, and do you really want to direct those trucks that are backed up with traffic lights and stop signs and 2 lanes into all the neighborhoods around here? And is that gonna make this community happy?
Yeah, we haven't done much love for federal.
Because it wouldn't make me happy if I lived there.
That's a major corridor.
Yeah, so
You gotta deal with federal.
Is there hotels?
you know, I think
People are biking.
things that like mixed use and the the edge retail stuff. Maybe the edge retail makes more sense closer to the larger area. And with mixed use, people can also, make little apartments above the place and, kind of. That's a probably come to get rid of the traffic.
Where are they going to
Well, Loretta Heights
New buildings have trees.
So I put trees on the street.
Is that a high school down there with the kids, or is that?
They will.
Yeah, Lincoln High School.
That's Lincoln.
They are helping. If they actually succeed in changing the types of businesses here, that would make
Taking
sense.
the they're on the contract.
Right.
Yeah, well, we get rid of Lakeside. No, I'm not.
All right, you guys, 2 minutes, 2 minute warning.
You guys, 2 more minutes. We got 2 more minutes. You want to, you actually want to.
So what, this is what it has to all
Turn it into one way and turn this into one way. But I don't think there's any streets to work with.
Yeah, no, so I'll tell you, I've read studies, I know the one where it would.
What is?
So this is trying to say, what should we do with this?
I guess.
This is the property line.
So everything on this side of the property line is track. So we got room for 2 lanes. What is that?
There's something that's
Wow, and we can fit transit in there too.
So we have a protected.
I agree, 100%.
Well, we're going to take everything you said and write a plan. So typically the exercise is relevant, it's in context, and it's in the neighborhood, and most people are from the neighborhood, but that's a good comment. Thank you.
And that's why planners don't come up with these plans back in the office, right, in a vacuum. Really, the stakeholder involvement and the expertise that's local there is so essential to a successful neighborhood plan.
Right.
It's a great observation.
I would say chicken and egg. It's really, you can say you want this to happen, but if you don't have the vision of the private property owners, whether they're businesses or residential, then you can make all these plans, but they can't necessarily be successful.
So you're saying we need the vision of the private
It's not
property
a lot
owners?
more on that one than on this one, because this was such a larger scale.
Right.
But
So let me give you some context on that one as well. So we are initiating a conceptual design of Washington Street, and we have gone to every single owner along Washington Street to try to bring together a group and have a conversation. So it's a little different there because it's not very wide, and the vision from the plan is on the folks that are at the meeting. So reach out to their neighbors and try to get input from their neighbors in the process. But those are good observations. What else was challenging?
I kept trying to think about how it's currently being used and redesigning around that instead of thinking, 20 years from now, how's it going to be used? A few members kept reminding me of that.
Okay. Yeah, I think to have a facilitator at your table, likely the facilitator would say, okay, so that's today. We're thinking about the future and try to bring the group for that perspective. So, any other challenges? And then I want to open it up for general Q&A.
Well, one thing about this area is all so completely built out. Because you have to scrape something to put something in, pretty much.
So did you guys identify the areas of change, if you will, or where you would like to see redevelopment?
Sort of.
I think along Federal Boulevard, somewhat, and Morrison Road, some of the arteries.
Although it's labeled Wadsworth, it's actually Federal.
I realize that. I'm going to tell the person that made this one.
That's what's wrong with that. Oh, now you tell me.
Okay, so just general Q&A. Any other questions about neighborhood planning? Kyle Dalton is actually here and will be leading the discussion about zoning. So if there are questions about how neighborhood planning relates to zoning, might be some transition questions, good segue question.
Demographics were one of those line items. Is affordability a factor that you consider in your demographics?
Yes, so it's actually in economy of the cost burden of the home is data that is readily available by neighborhood. So if it's more than 50% of your income, then you're burdened, the price of your home is a burden to you, and so that we can actually map that by neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Y'all in particular is changing, and how many people are moving, not just from different places around the city, but coming here basically completely out of context and maybe have completely different ideas about what they want the neighborhood that they happen to move into to look like, and maybe don't care what it's been historically. Like, how do you, are you seeing more conflicts in these sorts of meetings that you're doing with kind of new residents?
There is always conflict.
Sure.
And consensus is, what's consensus? People are not necessarily agreeing, but they're not,
Consensus is lacking.
And so the other thing is that, there are good planning principles out there that we talk a lot about in the beginning of a neighborhood process. Things to consider. What is livability? What does it mean to you? What's historic preservation? What are the assets of the neighborhood that should be preserved? And that conversation happens, and we often look back to those guiding principles that are established early on, and we weigh the recommendations against them. And so if there is a wild idea that probably will never be implemented, we have multiple screens or filters. That's a bad planning idea, but it just doesn't meet the general planning principles that we discussed. It also doesn't meet the guiding principle. Where does that fit into the vision that we've laid out? That's how we start to generate or build consensus as a group and really narrow down to that plan that's ultimately adopted.
I have a question about the neighborhood planning analysis. Do you use for those categories, like surveys, census data?
Yeah, a lot of it's coming from the census. We're limited. Not all data is available by neighborhood. So we have to pick data sources that are available. I think Colorado Public Health Environment it provides data. Piton provides a lot of data by neighborhood. A lot of their data actually comes from the census.
Some of it's data that we collect ourselves, so like building permit activity, those are the types of things that we're tracking in-house as well.
Dr. Cog, for example, would they contribute to that feedback or that data input? Dura? Any of those entities?
Yeah, they could. A lot of times they're presenting the data, pulling it from census or sources.
Okay.
Similar to Piton. I don't know that Piton is generating a lot of data. They're mostly displaying it or displaying it by neighborhood.
What is Piton?
It's a
foundation. It's a nonprofit, right?
It is a nonprofit.
Philanthropic. All right, folks. I see a lot of people wilting. We do have to clear out. We have that hard stop again here in this building. So what I'm going to do is stop us a little bit early. You know, I'm always available if you have questions. If I don't have the answers, certainly can work to find the answers to you. So as you're, processing what we've talked about this evening, tonight, you wake up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night because you didn't ask that one question, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to follow up with you. I'm going to leave you the same type of complicated 4-question survey so that you can help us as we refine this program to move forward into future years, hopefully. And in a minute, I'll put up the display again so you can see the website link. If you prefer to do this online, you're welcome to do it there as well. But we've intentionally made it pretty short and sweet. You've seen this before. Thank you so much for taking the time to fill this out. It means a lot to us, and your feedback is really going to help us as we refine this program. So I'll leave these at the individual tables. Take a minute or two to fill them out if you can. Leave them on the table on your way out. And we'll see you in 2 weeks for our final session on zoning. So stay tuned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
We were a big red bar.